I can't believe it. Week 1 is finally here. It's time for kickoff. I'm so pumped. You know that it's time for football when start and sit videos are coming out by the fantasy headliners. I know. We got to celebrate. How are we going to celebrate, though? I got an idea. Let's do it. Come on. We're going streaking through the quad. What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back and fully clothed for my first wide receiver start and sit video of the 2020 season. I am pumped, ready to roll, and we are going to jump into all the information very shortly, but I got just a couple of things to remind you about, so hold on quickly. Number one, we get over 10,000 comments, emails, DMs, anything that you can think of a week with fantasy questions. We try to get to as many as possible. But if you love our content and you want to guarantee answers from us to all of your questions, you can head over to Patreon, link down below in the description of the video, and you can sign up for the pro level tier, which guarantees answers to all of your questions as long as you are in that tier, and also access to all of our exclusive content. And you know what? You want to play some DFS as well? Go over to the MVP tier. You get into a chat with Jake, myself, the other writers. You get all of Chris Kennedy's DFS picks, optimizer information, and you can go ahead and win yourself some cash money in 2020. Oh, that sounds like a slogan to me. Cash money in 2020. I like it. All right, Headliner Nation. And also, I just want to remind you, if this is your first venture to the Fantasy Headliners and you don't quite understand what we're talking about with start and sit, keep in mind, we do start and sit videos for every position and rankings for every position. So this is kind of a broad overview of all the positions and who we should be starting and sitting. In this one, we're going to be talking about every matchup for wide receivers this week. And then, of course, my wide receiver rankings to help break it down even more for you will be coming out in a couple of days. So I think that's it. It's time to jump into it, Headliner Nation, and let's talk about our wide receivers for week 1 of the 2020 season. All right, the first matchup of the week, Houston's going to Kansas City for Thursday Night Football in a rematch of a great playoff game last year that saw the Texans put the Kansas City Chiefs on the hooks, but they couldn't quite finish the job. This is liable to be another shootout with a lot of points scored. But with that even being said, with Houston, I'm being cautiously optimistic this week. I'm definitely going to be starting Will Fuller. If the guy's healthy, you put him in your lineup. The dude has wide receiver 2 upside every single week, and if he scores, he's got wide receiver 1 upside as well. Some of you decided to take the gamble and draft him this year, so use him up while you can. I'm also going to be putting Randall Cobb in my lineup this week. I got him listed as a start as well because I think we're going to see him working out of the slot an awful lot. And last year, the wide receivers that worked out of the slot tend to be pretty efficient with their targets. Now, with that being said, they did have quite a bit of targets to DeAndre Hopkins in the slot, but Randall Cobb fits what they're looking for there. And even though he's a new guy there, I'm still going to roll with him because I'm going to sit the other guys in the lineup. Brandon Cooks, I'm going to go ahead and sit this week. He's been dealing with an injury. Kenny Stills, I'm not interested in putting in my lineup either. And Kiki, do you love me, QT? I'm not going to go that route either. Now, what about Kansas City? Well, with Kansas City, Tyreek Hill, even though he has been dealing with a little bit of a hamstring issue, I think he's going to be all right come Thursday Night Football. He's been sitting for a while now. This is not anything new that just popped up like Brandon Cooks. So he's going to be ready to roll, and he's going to get out there, and I think he's going to have a fine game. Mecole Hardman, Sammy Watkins, I'm going to go ahead and pass on those two guys. A little too boom or bust for me. I want to see how those roles play out. Mecole Hardman could become a guy that finds himself in the start column a lot this season if he contributes a lot. But I got to see week 1, see how they're utilizing him. Is he going to be on the field more often than not? That's what I got to be on the lookout for here on Thursday Night Football. Philadelphia will head to Washington in week 1 for an NFC East matchup and the early slate of Sunday games. And for the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm going to go ahead and skip on Alshon Jeffrey and Jalen Reagor. I'm going to list them as injured. Don't want to factor them into the equation because honestly, if I list them as sits, that's too easy. That's not how we do things here. So they're going to be in injury status for me. Deshaun Jackson, though, definitely going to be a start. A dude that still has a little bit of pep in his step and could definitely take it to the house against Washington. And honestly, without a whole lot of established weapons around him at wide receiver right now, he's going to be the guy that's probably going to be looked at quite a bit by Carson Wentz. For the other three guys in that lineup, John Hightower, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Greg Ward, I'm going to list all three of them as sits. Nothing against any of them. One of those guys is probably going to have a pretty decent game. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them also took one to the house. However, I don't know who it's going to be. It's really kind of a dart throw with who's going to be the wide receiver 2 this week. And with that being said, I don't really want to be throwing that dart here in week 2. Now, with Washington, Terry McLaurin, he's definitely going to be a start for me. And Steven Sims is going to be a start for me. Love both of these guys. McLaurin, that connection with Dwayne Haskins. Yes, it kind of faded at the end last season, but I'm going to go off the prior experience and what I've seen while they were together at Ohio State over just a few weeks in the NFL, because Dwayne Haskins has improved quite a bit. We've talked about that on the channel this season. I think that connection with McLaurin is going to be a big one this year. And with Steven Sims, love Steven Sims. Steven Sims is a guy I broke down in our draft guide as my breakout this season. Keep an eye on him, especially in half PPR and PPR formats. He's a guy that's probably going to see a ton of targets, especially in a game like this where it could be a lot of back and forth and Washington has to throw the football quite a bit. Keep in mind, they have a lot of young guys and J.D. McKissick in the backfield right now for them. It might be tough to get the run game established in week 1, so they might be throwing it a little bit more instead. And for my third option, Dontrell Inman, I'm not really interested in him. That's kind of a maybe something we'll talk about later on in the season, but he's going to be their wide receiver 3 as of right now, and we're going to go ahead and just pass on him for the time being. I fully expect Miami to go into New England in week 1 and compete with them. And if I said that to you a year ago, you would probably laugh. But this is a New England team that has lost their quarterback in Tom Brady. They've lost 6 starters on the defensive side of the ball. They're still going to be pretty decent against the pass, but they're probably going to get shredded by the run. Their run defense isn't going to be that great. But when it comes to wide receivers for Miami this week, Preston Williams is a guy that I'm going to start. He looks to be healthy and ready to go. And the thing I like about Preston Williams this week is their ability to move him into the slot a little bit. And that's why I have him listed as a sit or a start and Devontae Parker as a sit. Devontae Parker is probably going to be facing Stephen Gilmore quite a bit. That has a chance to be a lockdown matchup on Devontae Parker. So if they're able to move Preston Williams in and out of the slot a little bit more, and get him into favorable matchups and put Jakeem Grant on the outside, I think that's going to give Preston Williams a lot of opportunity to see targets this week. And a game where even though they're going to have to be running the ball quite a bit, and I think they're going to do that successfully, it will probably open up the passing game and give them a few big passes with Ryan Fitzmagic in the backfield. Jakeem Grant, mentioned him. He's going to be a sit for me this week. I like Jakeem Grant, though, okay? A special teams guy, but with the opt-outs that they've had so far, he's going to be a guy that could quickly fill a role for them and might have some big games this season. So don't completely forget about Jakeem Grant, except for week 1. Now, for New England, we've got 3 guys to be taking a look at: N'Keal Harry, Julian Edelman, and Jakobi Meyers. I'm going to roll with Julian Edelman. They're probably going to have him in the slot quite a bit. He's going to be a guy that's going to be peppered with targets by Cam Newton. They moved on from Mohamed Sanu a few weeks ago, which caught a lot of us by surprise. Julian Edelman, the locked-in number 1 wide receiver there. Even though he's going to see a lot of volumes, it could be a little inefficient at times as teams queue on him, especially if N'Keal Harry hasn't really grown into that pedigree that made him a first-round pick a couple years ago. For Jakobi Meyers, him and Harry, they're both going to be sits for me. I got to see these guys in action, especially for Harry. I like Harry. I like the talent coming out of Arizona State. But again, rookie year last year wasn't great. Obviously, he had some injury issues. There's been some talk about him looking slow, unable to separate. I want to see the way he looks in week 1 before I start putting him in my lineup. When you talk about Green Bay, well, you got to say Davante Adams. And when you say Davante Adams, it's pretty much a locked and loaded start. Now, the pass defense for Minnesota last year wasn't as great as it had been in the past. Can they get back to being a team that can shut down the pass a little bit more? Doesn't matter for me. I'm still starting Davante Adams. Allen Lazard, I like him as a wide receiver too there in Green Bay. I think he's a guy that on a weekly basis can have some sneaky value. But this week, I'm a little concerned about starting him. The one thing I like about Minnesota is this is a team that the defense is looking pretty good right now, okay? The defense is going to be formidable for Aaron Rodgers. And we got to see how often they actually throw the ball. Are they going to come out running? Or is that potential run defense stopping them going to shy them away and going over to passing it a little bit more in week one? With Allen Lazard, I'm not willing to take that risk this week. I'd rather go a different route and put someone else in my flex play, because that's really what Lazard is probably going to be this season. Maybe a wide receiver 3 start at times as well. And for Marquez Valdes-Scantling, we're going to go ahead and pass on him. I like him. I like his speed. I definitely think he can be a deep play guy, but Allen Lazard seems to be the number 2 target right now. We'll see if MVS can take that away from him at any point in time. For Minnesota, I'm going to sit both of the guys this week that are going to be the main targets there for them, Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. With Adam Thielen, I'm just not feeling it this week. He's going to get cornerback 1 coverage a majority of the game more than likely. That worries me. Unless they're willing to put him in the slot 100% of the time, not really 100%, but 50% of the time, I think this is going to be a guy that, yeah, he could see some volume, but as I talked about this offseason, he may be inefficient with it. I don't really trust him this week. I think this is a wait-and-see type play for me. Obviously, if you've spent an early round pick on Thielen and he's your wide receiver 1 or 2, you have to start him. And I'm not saying bench him for some waiver wire guy that you picked up, but I'm definitely telling you keep expectations a little bit lower this week. The question for me right now is who develops into that wide receiver 2 for Phillip Rivers? Is it Paris Campbell or is it Michael Pittman Jr.? Until we know for sure, I can't start either of those guys. That's why I've got them listed as sits this week. T.Y. Hilton, though, against a Jacksonville defense that quite honestly is just going to suck, I'll roll with him. He looks healthy. He looks ready to go. Phillip Rivers should be looking his way quite often. And with that being said, one big play is really going to make the week for T.Y. Hilton. Even if Indianapolis gets out in front by quite a bit early and then they run the football a lot, I still think T.Y. Hilton will get his before they come to that stage of the game. For Jacksonville, G.J. Chark is going to be a start for me this week. Didn't really love him this season. All offseason long, I said he's going to be the one guy that could potentially bust at his ADP. However, after letting go of Leonard Fournette and knowing that they might not have those targets going towards the running back anymore, it really encouraged me to move G.J. Chark up in my standings a little bit. Keep in mind that he scored darn near 43% of his fantasy points in only 3 weeks last year. So he has a little boomer bust potential. Just keep that in mind as you deploy him to your lineup. But again, who's going to help outside of that? We know Gardner Minshew is probably going to have to throw the football quite a bit. Chris Conley, D.D. Westbrook, Laviska Shenault. Who's it going to be? Shenault's a guy that I like maybe a little bit later on in the season, but we got to see some game action from him. The other 2 guys, we've seen up and down performances from them in the past, so I'm not willing to hedge any bets with them in week 1. Chicago heads to Detroit in week 1, and there's 2 names in Chicago I'm definitely putting in my lineup, and it's Anthony Miller and Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson, a wide receiver 1 last year with Mitchell Trubisky. That's who's going to be the starter again. If Mitchell Trubisky can get it done with Allen Robinson, then it's quite honestly the only reason for that is because Allen Robinson's just a freaking stud. So you just put Allen Robinson in your lineup if you own him. And for Anthony Miller, this is the guy that has fared well against Detroit in the past. I expect him to fare well again this week. You're probably going to see a lot of Allen Robinson and Ted Ginn Jr. on the outside and then Anthony Miller in the slot. And that is where Mitchell Trubisky has a chance to really beat up on the Lions a little bit. Can that Lions defense take a step forward from last year? I'm not going to fully believe it until I see it, but Anthony Miller could be a start there. And then also, again, mentioned it with Ted Ginn Jr., he's going to be a sit for me. Yeah, he could go off for one big play, but that's not going to be enough of a factor for me to actually put him into my lineup. For Detroit, we're starting big play Galladay, okay? You got Kenny Galladay pretty early in your drafts. You're putting him in your lineup. Expect another great season from him. For Marvin Jones, I am going to sit him this week. I expect to see a lot in the run game. A little bit of a mix between Adrian Peterson, getting him in, getting him familiar with everything. He's a savvy vet, okay? This isn't like these rookies. He's been around the game for a long time. I expect him to come in and pick up on things pretty early. And he's probably going to get a decent amount of work in week 1. You might see a little bit of DeAndre Swift sprinkled in. You might see some Kerryon Johnson sprinkled in. But don't be surprised if they really try to establish the run and get some of those guys going and get that moving forward early and often. That's why I've got him as a sit, along with going to TJ Hawkinson potentially quite a bit, who has looked really good in camp. He could take a little bit away from Marvin Jones. And then Danny Amendola, I like him in the slot, but not nearly enough for me to be starting him on a weekly basis right now. Las Vegas is going to head to Carolina in week 1, and this isn't the same type of Carolina defense as we've seen in the past. This is going to be another tough year for that defense. Even though they spent quite a bit of picks on that side of the ball here in 2020, I still don't expect it to really take a step forward as of yet. Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards are both going to be starts for me. Why is that? Because honestly, it's probably a coin flip. One of them is going to end up hitting this week. Who is it? Hopefully, it's both of them. My main concern, though, is that Las Vegas puts it on Carolina early and often, and then they run with Josh Jacobs quite a bit. If that happens, that could cap some of the ceiling that we have with Edwards and Ruggs. Ruggs has so much explosiveness, though. Honestly, one big play puts him in the start column. So I'm going to roll with him. And Bryan Edwards, who I expect to see quite a bit of volume, I expect him to go there too. With Hunter Renfrow, I'm going to put Hunter Renfrow as a sit along with Nelson Aguilar. Both of those guys I'm going to list as sits this week. One of them is going to end up being the wide receiver 3. More than likely, it's going to be Hunter Renfrow, and then you'll see Aguilar on the field every once in a while and maybe some 4 wide receiver sets. But I don't think they're going to take Darren Waller off the field too often to put Nelson Aguilar on the field. For Carolina, well, with Carolina, I've talked about them quite a bit this offseason, and even though I was a little bit worried about DJ Moore this year, I'm still going to roll with him in week 1. DJ Moore is going to be a start for me. Again, if Carolina goes down early, they're going to have to throw the ball quite a bit, so it could be volume alone that makes DJ Moore a start this week. For the other guys, though, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, I'm going to list them as sit. Number 1 with Curtis Samuel, I got to see him in game action. There's been a lot of mixed reviews this year from training camp. Some say that he's looked really good. Others say he's looked awful. How are they going to utilize him, and how are they going to use his skill set in that offense this year? I got to see that in week 1. And with Robbie Anderson, he is a big play threat. And again, if they're down and going to be passing it quite often, you could roll with him and hope that he goes for the big TD. But honestly, I might look for a little bit of a safer bet here in week 1. If any of you have watched The Waterboy with Adam Sandler, the music that they have in there where they're all singing "Water sucks, it really, really sucks." I'm not going to sing. I don't want to scare a bunch of you away. I can only imagine that New York Jets fans are singing the same thing about Adam Gase, because Adam Gase sucks, and he's brought this team down to really a level that's just unfortunate to see with the talent that they have there. But with that being said, they're going to be facing off against Buffalo and probably what will be their first loss of the season. For their wide receivers, Jamison Crowder, I'm going to start Jamison Crowder, especially if I'm in a PPR league. The dude's going to get peppered with more than enough targets to really be a guy that can handle the workload and get you some nice floor points each and every week. Best part about it is he doesn't have to play on the outside, so he doesn't have to see those tough cornerback matchups on the outside. Perryman and Denzel Mims, though, they're going to be sits for me. Both of them have dealt with injuries in training camp. I don't know if either of them are even going to be fully healthy for this game, so we'll kind of have to keep an eye on if they pop up on the injury report at any time this week. But with Mims and Perryman, I'm going to be skipping out on them. However, for Buffalo, I'm going to roll with both Stephon Diggs and John Brown this week. I expect both of them to see some big plays. I expect Buffalo to say, you know what, we're going to unleash these guys early this week, and they're going to be throwing the football. It's a good time as ever to really rack up some points and establish yourselves as the favorites. That's right. Who thought we'd be saying that about Buffalo? Of the AFC East in 2020. So I expect them to come out firing to both of those guys. For the Beazles, though, Cole Beazles, I'm going to go ahead and list him as a sit this week because I expect the big plays to go to the outside, and if things get out of hand quickly, then I expect them to use some Zach Moss, Devin Singletary rotation throughout the game to continue to punish the New York Jets on the ground. Well, after reports came out about Odell Beckham Jr. that, discussed some fetishes that he may or may not like in the bedroom, you only have to assume that he's going to come out this weekend and drop a deuce. Yeah, I know. Great chance at humor there, right? Anyway, so with Odell Beckham Jr., I'm going to start him this week. It's a tough matchup against Baltimore. I don't care. I expect the Browns to come out and be hungry. I expect Odell Beckham Jr. to come out and be hungry. I expect Baker Mayfield to come out and be hungry. Even though they might end up losing this game, OBJ is going to get his in week 1. Jarvis Landry, I'm going to list as a sit, though, because I got to see him back on the football field. He should be healthy and ready to roll, but I want to see that before I roll with him too often. Now, if he's your wide receiver 2 in a league or maybe wide receiver 3, and you don't have a lot of great opportunities around him, not anybody that you can pick up off off waivers or anyone you can put on the bench, then you got to roll with him this week. But for me, I think he's got a pretty low floor, or excuse me, a pretty low ceiling. I don't know if he's going to quite reach that this week in week 1 against Baltimore. For Baltimore, though, I am definitely going to be starting Marquise Brown. I talked about him this offseason. I talked about him as a breakout or bust candidate, and there is a reasonable path to wide receiver 1 status. Will he reach that? Probably not, but it's a lot closer than a lot of you think. I broke that down in a video, did the math for you and everything, and the possibilities are there if he is healthy this year. He's added a little bit of weight. He's bulked up a little bit, but he hasn't lost any of the speed. Expect him to bounce back and be ready to roll. For the other options, though, we're going to go ahead and pass on them for right now. Miles Boykin and Devin Duvernay probably are going to be your wide receiver 2 and 3. Neither of those guys interest me in week 1 against Cleveland, though. The last game of the early afternoon slate, Seattle and Atlanta. There's only 2 wide receivers that matter in Seattle, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And in a game that which should have a lot of back and forth and a lot of points scored, well, heck, we're going to roll with them both. DK Metcalf should see more than enough volume, obviously can take one to the house, and Tyler Lockett, him and Russell Wilson have an historic connection. They're extremely efficient when going with each other, so I expect him to have some big plays as well this week. I think you can deploy both of them safely, knowing there's going to be a lot of points scored in Atlanta. With the Falcons, definitely going to start Julio Jones because you never sit Julio. Calvin Ridley is a breakout candidate for us this year. Definitely expect him to get his in a high-scoring matchup. But for their wide receiver 3, Russell Gage, no, nothing there could possibly want me to start him. Just keep in mind, this is one of the higher line totals from Vegas this week. Because of that, we want these wide receivers in our lineup. The Chargers get to head to Cincinnati this week, and more than likely, Cincinnati is going to be prone to giving up a few big plays. Most of those are probably going to go to Keenan Allen, who is going to be really the only rosterable wide receiver from that team for a while. Unfortunately, Mike Williams, dealing with that arm injury, is going to miss some weeks, so Keenan Allen is going to see that volume, and he's probably going to see some pretty efficient volume against a Cincinnati team that might not be able to stop them right away. And then, of course, obviously, KJ Hill being the other option there. We're not really going to worry about him right now. We'll see how long Mike Williams is out. Maybe he becomes viable in a couple of weeks, but for now, we're going to go ahead and pass over him. Cincinnati, though, I mean, look at this depth chart. A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, John Ross, Auden Tate, 5 guys that can step out there and help on the field at any point in time, which might be odd to hear me say because I've got all of but one listed as a sit this week. Here's why. A.J. Green, I've got to see him on the field and healthy. When I see that, I will be more comfortable starting him moving forward. But this week, because of where you drafted him, you probably got some guys that have just as much upside. So you could make it through this week and sit A.J. Green and not be burned by it. Let's see what happens in week 1 and go from there. Tyler Boyd, I project him to have the most targets of anyone on this team this week. They're probably going to have to pass it a little bit. And because of that, coupled with A.J. Green being injured, he just came back, supposedly healthy, was on the field. I mean, what do we know about A.J. Green without actually seeing him on the field too much right now? Okay, so I'm just being cautious with it. Tyler Boyd could see the most targets this week. John Ross is going to be on the field a little bit. Auden Tate's going to be on the field a little bit. We'll see what happens with T. Higgins. He's been dealing with some issues as well. But because of that group that's kind of just bundled up behind him, whatever word you want to use, bumbled, whatever. Okay, I can't talk. It's fine. But those guys are all piled up behind them right now. So we'll see how those things go over the next couple of weeks and who might establish themselves after Boyd and after Green. Arizona's going to head out to San Francisco and face a banged up 49ers team. I mean, that's the best way to put it right now. They're dealing with quite a bit of injuries. We'll talk about that in a second. But for Arizona, I'm going to go ahead and run with the newly paid DeAndre Hopkins and Larry Fitzgerald. That's right, Larry Fitzgerald working out of the slot is a favorite of mine to be a guy that can really help on a week-to-week basis this year. And with DeAndre Hopkins, you know, even though we're a little bit down on him, he's still a top 10 wide receiver for us. You still start him, you still play him regardless of the matchup. And the other option there, Christian Kirk, I'm not interested in it this week. I want to see who establishes themselves as the wide receiver 2. Is it Fitzgerald or Kirk? Right now, my bet is it being Fitzgerald working in the slot. if that happens, I think Larry Fitzgerald will be the guy to own this year, and then Christian Kirk will have a little bit of a down year and then hopefully bounce back next year. Now for San Francisco, they've got a lot of options. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. Not because they want to, but because they have a bunch of injuries. So I don't know what in the world is going to happen this week with the San Francisco wide receivers. I mean, right now, Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, I have listed as injured. Okay, I'm going to put the injury designation on both of them. Haven't officially been ruled out yet. I don't expect them to play. But then you've got Trent Taylor and you got Dante Pettis. What's going to happen with them? You got Kendrick Bourne. The reason I'm going to list Kendrick Bourne as a start is because I think he scores a touchdown this week. Now, I'm listing him as a start because I think he could end up reaching that threshold where we list him as a start. However, by no means should you be running out to pick up Kendrick Bourne off the waiver wire and start him this week. If you are doing that, you've already lost your league this year, okay? I'm going to be honest with you. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but if you need to start him this week, you've got issues with your team, okay? Don't do it. Hey, maybe if you're doing some GPP DFS, take a shot at him. But in your season-long leagues, it should not happen. But again, the reason I'm listing him as a start is because I think he's going to find the end zone this week. I think he can be a guy that ends up hitting that points, that threshold that we have to establish them as a starter. One of the biggest matchups in week one, the newly renovated Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to head to New Orleans, and we get to see the future Hall of Famer, the GOAT himself, Tom Brady, in a new uniform for the first time ever in his NFL career. It's weird to say that. For Tampa Bay on the road, there's only two wide receivers to worry about. It's Mike Evans, it's Chris Godwin. You start both of them. Why? Obvious reasons. If I have to tell you to start those guys, then I can't really help you with your team that much, okay? But these guys, you're definitely going to be starting them and one of the highest accumulated point totals of the week per Vegas. For New Orleans, we start Michael Thomas. We're absolutely going to run with him this week. I'm not going to run, however, with Emmanuel Sanders or Traquan Smith. I like Emmanuel Sanders down the road a little bit. However, I think we're going to see a lot of Alvin Kamara, a lot of Michael Thomas, and a lot of Jared Cook, which won't leave a lot left over for Emmanuel Sanders. I think he might get a few targets, but I'm talking like maybe 4 catches on 5 targets for like 60 yards or something like that. That's not enough to list him as a start by our basis here. So for this week, I'm going to go ahead and skip on Emmanuel Sanders, but in future weeks, after he gets a little bit more into the offense and moving forward, we might consider it then. For Sunday Night Football, Dallas is going to head to Los Angeles to face the Rams, and Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup are both going to be starts for me, and here's why. I think we're going to see Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb bounce back and forth between the slot and outside, which means somebody is going to get Jalen Ramsey every once in a while. But because they move guys back and forth, I think they'll be more than capable of handling the workload and getting enough targets and receptions to be a start. Michael Gallup for me is also going to be a start because I don't think he is going to be seeing too much of Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey will probably only be on Michael Gallup if Amari Cooper is in the slot. If Amari Cooper goes back outside, Jalen Ramsey might go back outside. They might also just hold Jalen Ramsey to one side. I don't know how that's going to play out yet. But for Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper, those are the guys I'm going to go with as starts. CeeDee Lamb, first game, I want to see it, okay? That's the same thing with a lot of these rookies this year. I want to see it. I want them on the field. I want to see how they're doing with the game plan. I want to see how they're doing with the offense before I invest too much in these rookie wide receivers. For the Rams, well, Bobby Trees is definitely going to be a start for us as well as Cooper Kupp. We're going to be starting both of those guys. Who's going to be the wide receiver 3 there, though? That's the one thing that we're going to be taking a look at. Is it going to be breakout rookie Van Jefferson, the standout during training camp? Is he going to be the wide receiver 3 there? Is it going to be Josh Reynolds, a guy that people have clamored about picking up for the last couple of years whenever there's been an injury? He might have been displaced. Both of those guys are going to be a sit for me this week, though. Whoever scheduled the New York Giants and the Pittsburgh Steelers for Monday Night Football, they should just lose their job, okay? Yeah, Pittsburgh's going to be exciting to watch, and the Giants will probably be exciting at some point too, but there's some pretty good matchups here this weekend. The Giants and the Steelers? Ugh. Anyway, For the Giants this week, I'm only going to start Golden Tate. We're going to go ahead and sit the other two guys, Slayton and Shepard. Tate, I like a lot out of the slot this week, okay? I like him really being a target monster this week against Pittsburgh, a game in which New York will probably be down a majority of the day. Normally you would say, well, Kyle, if they're going to be down, well, why wouldn't you start the other wide receivers? Well, with Shepard and Slayton, I think those two are going to hedge some targets from each other, and they're going to be the ones kind of out of luck this week when it comes to seeing some of those bigger plays. I think we're going to see a lot to Tate, a lot to Barkley, and a whole lot to Ingram, which isn't going to leave enough for these guys. For Pittsburgh, well, Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be a start for us. And you know what? James Washington, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, I'm going to wait on those three. If I had to pick one, Deontay Johnson may hit start status for me this week. I think it's going to be close. Definitely has an opportunity to score a touchdown. But I think we're going to see Eric Ebron a little bit this week. I think we're going to see Vance McDonald a little bit this week. And I think we're going to see a whole lot of the run game. I think this week what we're going to see kind of happen with Ben Roethlisberger is ease into it a little bit. Washington, Johnson, and Claypool are guys that I could see going a little bit more down the field, where Juju is going to be the guy with those intermediate to short routes. And that might be where Ben Roethlisberger kind of sticks this week. Let's get that elbow going. Let's see how I feel. Let's get into the rhythm of things. His deep ball might be a little bit off this week, so it's kind of a rhythm thing for me. It's nothing against the wide receivers. I just don't really see any of them hitting pay dirt this week, except for maybe Juju. Possibly Chase Claypool if it's in the red zone and he gets a little bit of a toss ball that he can go up and get. For the second Monday night matchup, it's going to be Tennessee at Denver. And right before recording this video, we found out that Von Miller likely out for the season with an Achilles injury, which is not good for this Denver defense. This was an under-the-radar defense for me, a team that could apply a lot of pressure. Losing Von Miller, though, is going to greatly help the Tennessee Titans this week. I've got A.J. Brown listed as a start. I was contemplating it in week 1 because I didn't know if Ryan Tannehill was going to have enough time to throw the ball. But with no Von Miller, I think he's going to find more than enough time this week. With Adam Humphries and Corey Davis, though, I think outside of A.J. Brown, we're going to see Jonnu Smith as that number 2 target. We'll talk about him on the tight ends video. And then we're going to see them running the ball an awful lot this week. So I highly expect A.J. Brown to get his because Ryan Tannehill will have a little bit more time now. But for the other two, I just don't see enough targets in week 1 to really be worth starting them. For Denver, Courtland Sutton's still the wide receiver 1, right? I'll go ahead and start him against Tennessee. This Tennessee defense, though, is going to be really good this year, okay? So be careful with this defense, okay? A lot of teams overlooked it last year. It was pretty good last year. I expect it to be pretty good again this year. So with that being said, I will roll with Courtland Sutton this week with Drew Lock throwing in the ball. However, for everybody else, I'm going to go ahead and just take a step back. Hamler's the one guy that I'm going to list as an injured status. He's been dealing with that hamstring injury, obviously. So, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, who's going to really step in as that wide receiver 2? We'll see. But Courtland Sutton is the only guy that I'm going to risk it with this week. There you go, Headliner Nation. It's in the books. All said and done. Week 1, wide receivers start and sit. Don't forget, we've got all the start sits, all the rankings video, and much more content on the channel this season. Do me a favor, if you appreciate that comment, hit that like for me. You can leave a comment down below. We will get to as many as we possibly can. Do not be afraid to ask your questions. We'll get to them as soon as we can. We have other guys on staff helping out with questions down below. We'll do what we can. If you need answers, though, don't forget you can get those on Patreon by signing up for the Pro tier, guaranteeing answers to all of your questions this season. And as always, do me a favor, Headliner Nation, if you are new here, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. We just passed 90,000 followers. We're on the way to 100,000. Stay safe, stay healthy, Headliner Nation. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.